7 U.S. Navy warships suddenly appear 120 miles off Venezuela's coast. $14 billion in American naval power positioned within strike range. The Pentagon calls it routine operations. Venezuela calls it an act of war. But satellite imagery reveals something neither side is talking about. This is the real story behind America's largest Caribbean naval deployment in 30 years. At exactly 4:15 a.m. on December 18, 2024, Venezuelan coastal radar detected multiple surface contacts approaching territorial waters. The contacts maintained formation. They moved with purpose. Venezuela's Navy Command immediately escalated to DEFCON 2. Emergency sessions convened in Caracas. State media broadcast warnings of imminent American invasion. Social media exploded with speculation. But here's what nobody noticed. Those 7 warships weren't alone. Beneath the waves, 2 Ohio-class submarines had been positioned there for 6 days. Above the clouds, 3 RQ-4 Global Hawk surveillance drones circled at 60,000 feet. The visible warships were just the tip of the spear. Let's identify what's actually out there. Leading the surface group is USS Gerald R. Ford, America's newest supercarrier. This $13 billion floating city carries 75 aircraft, FA-18 Super Hornets, E-2D Advanced Hawkeyes, EA-18G Growlers for electronic warfare. The Ford can launch 270 sorties per day. That's one aircraft taking off every 5 minutes, 24 hours straight. Its electromagnetic catapult system can put a 50,000-pound fighter jet airborne in under 2 seconds. The ship's crew numbers 4,539 personnel. It's not just a warship, it's a mobile air base that happens to float. Flanking the Ford are 2 Arleigh Burke-class destroyers, USS Porter and USS James E. Williams. Each destroyer carries 96 vertical launch cells. Those cells contain a mix of weapons. Tomahawk cruise missiles with 1,000-mile range, SM-2 surface-to-air missiles, SM-6 dual-role missiles that can hit aircraft or ships, ASROC anti-submarine rockets. Each destroyer's Aegis combat system can track 100 targets simultaneously and engage 18 at once. The radar can detect a baseball-sized object 165 miles away. These ships are essentially floating missile farms wrapped in steel and advanced sensors. Behind them sits USS Herschel Woody Williams, an expeditionary sea base. This vessel serves as a floating logistics hub. It carries helicopters, special operations craft, medical facilities, command centers. The Williams can support 250 additional personnel beyond its crew. It's essentially a mobile military base that can sustain operations indefinitely without returning to port. Where this ship goes, extended operations follow. 2 Freedom-class littoral combat ships round out the visible force: USS Sioux City and USS Minneapolis-St. Paul. These ships look small at 3,500 tons each. Don't be fooled. They're fast attack vessels designed for coastal operations. Top speed exceeds 40 knots. They carry anti-ship missiles, naval strike missiles with 115-mile range, and can deploy unmanned surface and underwater vehicles. Their shallow draft allows operation in waters where larger warships cannot venture. They're the Navy's way of saying we can operate anywhere, including right up to your beaches. The final visible surface vessel is USNS Bob Hope, a large, medium-speed, roll-on, roll-off ship. This $450 million transport can carry an entire Marine Expeditionary Unit. That's 40 M1 Abrams tanks, 60 armored personnel carriers, 150 Humvees, plus ammunition, fuel, and supplies for 30 days of sustained combat operations. When the Bob Hope deploys with a carrier strike group, it signals one thing: somebody's preparing for potential ground operations. What's your weapon of choice for power projection? Type A for carrier-based aircraft, Type B for cruise missiles. Now here's where the story gets interesting. On December 15th, 3 days before Venezuela detected the surface group, a U.S. Air Force C-17 Globemaster made an unusual flight. It departed from Joint Base Charleston at 11:30 p.m. Flight tracking data shows it flew south over the Caribbean. Then, the transponder went dark near Aruba. The aircraft reappeared 2 hours later flying north. Empty. That C-17 can carry 170,000 pounds of cargo. What did it drop off? Where did it go? The Pentagon refuses to comment on specific flight operations. Simultaneously, commercial satellite imagery from Planet Labs captured something peculiar at Roosevelt Roads Naval Station in Puerto Rico. An area that had been empty for months suddenly showed 12 Measure 60S Seahawk helicopters. These birds specialize in combat search and rescue, special warfare support, and logistics. They appeared overnight. No public announcement, no press release, just suddenly there. At Guantanamo Bay, construction crews worked around the clock for 5 days in early December. They expanded the pier facilities. They reinforced the airfield. They installed new communication arrays. Official statements called it routine maintenance. But routine maintenance doesn't require 24-hour work schedules and priority material shipments. If you're enjoying this deep dive into modern warfare, take a moment to hit that subscribe button. The underwater component tells an even more compelling story. Those 2 Ohio-class submarines positioned off Venezuela's coast aren't ballistic missile subs. They're converted cruise missile platforms. Each submarine carries 154 Tomahawk missiles. That's 308 precision-guided weapons that can hit targets 1,000 miles inland. The submarines can launch their entire payload in under 6 minutes. They operate at depths exceeding 800 feet. They're virtually undetectable. Venezuela's anti-submarine warfare capability is minimal. Those subs could sit there for months without being found. But there's more in the water. On December 12th, the oceanographic research vessel Atlantis departed Woods Hole Oceanographic Institution. Its stated mission was deep-sea mapping research in the Caribbean. But the Atlantis carries advanced underwater drones and sensors. The same technology used for seabed mapping also creates detailed three-dimensional maps of underwater terrain. The kind of maps you need for submarine operations. The kind of maps you need for amphibious assault planning. The kind of maps the Navy suddenly needs around Venezuela. U.S. Southern Command increased its activity profile starting November 20th. Aircraft departures from Homestead Air Reserve Base jumped 340% compared to the previous month. Most flights headed south. KC-135 Stratotankers for aerial refueling. RC-135 Rivet Joint Signals Intelligence Aircraft. P-8 Poseidon Maritime Patrol Planes. E-8 Joint Stars Ground Surveillance Aircraft. This isn't a casual increase. This is systematic intelligence collection on a massive scale. Communications intercepts reveal something significant. Venezuelan military encrypted communications showed unusual patterns starting December 1st. Message volume increased 400%. Frequency hopping patterns changed. New encryption protocols activated. This is what militaries do when they believe someone is listening. They're right to be paranoid. The NSA's Special Collection Service likely compromised Venezuelan military communications years ago. Every message they send gets intercepted, decoded, and analyzed in near real time. The diplomatic activity matches the military posture. On December 8th, the U.S. ambassador to Colombia held unannounced meetings with Colombian military leadership. On December 10th, the U.S. Special Envoy for Venezuela made a quiet trip to Brasilia for discussions with Brazilian defense officials. On December 14th, the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff had a 90-minute secure video call with his counterparts in Chile, Peru, and Panama. None of these meetings appeared on public schedules. None generated press releases. But they all happened within a 6-day window. What would you have done when detecting 7 warships approaching your coast? Comment your answer below. The economic signals are equally telling. On December 5th, 3 major insurance companies quietly stopped offering coverage for vessels traveling to Venezuelan ports. Lloyd's of London updated its risk assessment for Caribbean shipping routes. Premiums for oil tankers heading to or from Venezuela increased 850% overnight. Insurance companies don't make these decisions based on politics. They react to intelligence about actual risks. Someone told them something that changed their calculation of danger. Global shipping patterns shifted. Vessel tracking data shows commercial ships began avoiding a 200-mile corridor north of Venezuela starting December 11th. Ships altered routes to add 300 extra miles rather than use the direct path. Shipping companies lose money with longer routes. They don't do this casually. They received warnings. Probably from navies, possibly from intelligence services, definitely from someone who knows what's coming. Oil futures markets reacted strangely starting December 7th. Venezuelan crude oil futures saw unusual put option activity. Someone with significant capital bet heavily that Venezuelan oil exports would decrease dramatically within 30 days. The options volume was 14 times normal trading levels. This is what market analysts call informed trading. Someone knows something and they're positioning to profit from it. Meanwhile, at U.S. military bases across the southern United States, activity increased. Fort Bragg activated 2 additional Special Forces groups. The 75th Ranger Regiment conducted emergency readiness drills. The 82nd Airborne Division canceled all leave for December. Marine Corps units at Camp Lejeune loaded equipment onto ships. None of this is secret, but nobody's talking about it either. The Pentagon calls it routine training readiness. Soldiers call it something else. They call it pre-deployment preparation. Don't miss what comes next. Make sure you're subscribed so you never miss an analysis like this. The intelligence picture becomes clearer when you map everything together. Communications intercepts show Venezuelan military chatter about missing weapons shipments from Russia. Satellite imagery confirms 2 Russian cargo planes landed in Caracas on November 28th and December 3rd. The planes matched the profile of military transport aircraft. They stayed on the ground for only 4 hours each. Quick turnaround suggests they dropped cargo and left immediately. What cargo requires that level of secrecy and speed? Human intelligence reports from within Venezuela describe unusual military movements, artillery units relocating to coastal positions, anti-aircraft batteries repositioning around key infrastructure, mobile radar systems dispersing to avoid being concentrated targets. This is defensive posturing. Venezuela's military leadership expects attack. They're preparing accordingly. But here's the problem. All their preparations get observed in real time by American intelligence. Every movement gets tracked. Every position gets mapped. Every defensive arrangement gets analyzed for vulnerabilities. The cyber domain shows interesting activity too. Starting December 9th, Venezuela's military and government networks experienced a series of sophisticated probing attacks. Not destructive attacks, reconnaissance. Someone tested their defenses. Someone mapped their networks. Someone identified critical nodes and backup systems. Cybersecurity firms tracked the attacks to infrastructure previously associated with U.S. Cyber Command. The attacks stopped on December 15th. Why? Because by then, the attackers had learned everything they needed to know. Space-based intelligence assets repositioned. 2 NRO reconnaissance satellites altered their orbits on December 4th to increase coverage over Venezuela and surrounding waters. These satellites can read license plates from 200 miles up. They can detect heat signatures from underground facilities. They monitor communications frequencies. When billion-dollar spy satellites change their orbits, it's because the intelligence community needs better coverage of something specific. Financial intelligence reveals significant capital flight from Venezuela, accelerating in early December. Wealthy Venezuelans moved $2.3 billion offshore in a 2-week period. Swiss bank accounts saw unusual deposit activity. Cryptocurrency transactions from Venezuelan sources spiked 600%. This happens when people with inside information prepare for instability. The Venezuelan elite knows something. They're moving their money to safety. Regional diplomatic traffic increased dramatically. The Organization of American States held 3 emergency sessions in December. The topics remain classified. Brazil reinforced its border with Venezuela. Colombia increased military patrols along their shared border. Trinidad and Tobago quietly activated coastal defense protocols. Small Caribbean nations updated their evacuation plans for nationals in Venezuela. These countries don't coordinate responses to coincidences. They respond to credible threat assessments shared by intelligence services. This kind of detailed tactical breakdown takes hours to research. Subscribe to help us keep making them. Now let's examine the official narratives. The Pentagon spokesperson stated on December 19th that the naval deployment represents routine freedom of navigation operations. The ships are operating in international waters. They pose no threat to any nation. The operations are planned months in advance. Standard diplomatic language, technically true, also carefully phrased to avoid revealing actual intentions. Venezuela's defense minister responded with heated rhetoric. He called the deployment an act of aggression. He threatened to defend Venezuelan sovereignty with all available means. He invoked international law and regional treaties. He appealed to allied nations for support. Classic defensive posturing. But here's what's interesting. Despite the strong words, Venezuela's military hasn't mobilized fully. They haven't called up reserves. They haven't evacuated civilians from potential target areas. Their actions don't match their rhetoric. Why? Because they know the difference between actual invasion preparation and strategic positioning. The timeline reveals careful orchestration. Intelligence collection began in mid-November. Diplomatic groundwork happened in early December. Military assets started moving into position by December 10th. The visible naval deployment arrived December 18th. This is a 30-day buildup, not rushed, not improvised. Methodically executed according to a predetermined plan. Plans like this exist for multiple scenarios. The question isn't whether a plan exists. The question is which specific plan got activated and why now. Geopolitical context matters. Venezuela sits on the world's largest proven oil reserves, 304 billion barrels. More than Saudi Arabia, more than Canada. Control Venezuela's oil and you influence global energy markets. Venezuela also provides China with a foothold in the Western Hemisphere. Chinese companies control Venezuelan ports. Chinese loans funded Venezuelan infrastructure. Chinese military advisors train Venezuelan forces. This isn't just about Venezuela. This is about competing great power interests. The Russian connection complicates everything. Russia has sold Venezuela over $11 billion in weapons since 2005. Russian military contractors operate in Venezuela. Russian strategic bombers have used Venezuelan airfields. Russian naval vessels regularly visit Venezuelan ports. An American move against Venezuela is simultaneously a move against Russian influence in the hemisphere. Moscow watches carefully. Their response matters. Recent events provide additional context. On November 15th, Venezuela held a referendum claiming sovereignty over oil-rich territory disputed with Guyana. The vote passed overwhelmingly. Guyana mobilized its limited military. Brazil sent troops to its border with both countries. The situation created regional instability. It also provided a potential justification for external intervention to prevent conflict. On December 2nd, Venezuelan security forces arrested 5 American citizens on espionage charges. The U.S. State Department called the arrests unlawful detention of innocent people. Venezuela presented what they claimed was evidence of CIA operations, true or fabricated. Impossible to verify, but it escalated tensions significantly. It also gave hardliners in both countries ammunition for aggressive policies. Oil prices provide another clue. Despite the naval deployment and rising tensions, oil futures remained relatively stable. Markets aren't panicking. Why not? Because sophisticated investors have access to intelligence that we don't. If they believed military conflict was imminent, oil prices would spike. The fact that prices remain steady suggests insiders think this is positioning rather than immediate attack preparation, or it suggests they believe any conflict would be so brief that oil supply disruptions would be minimal. Was this deployment a show of force or actual preparation for conflict? Leave your thoughts in the comments. The military science perspective adds clarity. The deployed forces represent exactly what you'd need for multiple scenarios. For a blockade? Absolutely. The carrier group and submarines could seal Venezuela off from maritime trade. For airstrikes? Definitely. The Ford's air wing plus Tomahawk missiles could hit 500 targets in the first hour. For invasion? Possibly. The amphibious capability exists, but would require additional forces. For intimidation? Perfect. $7 billion in visible warships sends an unmistakable message. But there's another possibility nobody's discussing publicly. What if this isn't about military action at all? What if this is about creating conditions for internal change? The visible military pressure strengthens hardliners in Venezuela who oppose the current government. It gives military officers an excuse to act if they're already considering regime change. It demonstrates to Venezuela's elite that their international support has limits. Sometimes the most effective military operation is the one you don't have to conduct, because your positioning achieves the objective without firing a shot. Historical precedent matters. The U.S. has deployed carrier strike groups multiple times without conducting actual military operations. In 1996, 2 carriers deployed near Taiwan when China conducted missile tests. China backed down, no shots fired. In 1994, a carrier group moved toward Haiti as military rulers resisted democratic transition. The rulers fled before the carriers arrived. In 2013, carriers positioned near Syria as chemical weapons concerns mounted. The deployment contributed to Syria agreeing to weapons inspections. Military presence often achieves objectives without combat. The intelligence implications are profound. Every hour those ships remain on station, they collect information. Radar signatures, communications frequencies, response patterns, defensive capabilities. If conflict ever does occur, the intelligence collected now becomes invaluable. This is reconnaissance by presence. The ships don't need to do anything aggressive. Their mere existence forces Venezuela to respond. Every response reveals information. Information creates advantages. Your engagement directly shapes what we cover next. Drop a comment and subscribe. The domestic political angle cannot be ignored. In the United States, different political factions view Venezuela through different lenses. Some see it as a failed socialist state requiring intervention. Others see it as a sovereign nation facing unjust pressure. The naval deployment occurs in a political context where demonstrating strength appeals to certain constituencies. Whether that drives policy or merely influences timing is debatable. But politics always intersects with military decisions. For Venezuela's government, the external pressure serves internal purposes too. Nothing unifies a population like external threat. The naval deployment allows Venezuelan leadership to rally nationalist sentiment. It distracts from economic problems. It justifies restricting civil liberties for security reasons. Both sides potentially benefit politically from the tension without necessarily wanting actual conflict. The question that matters most is what happens next. Several scenarios exist. First, the warships could simply remain on station indefinitely. This maintains pressure without escalation. Second, they could conduct increasingly aggressive freedom of navigation operations, probing Venezuelan responses. Third, an incident could occur accidentally or deliberately that changes the dynamic. Fourth, diplomatic breakthrough could resolve underlying tensions, allowing de-escalation. Fifth, the visible deployment could be cover for covert operations already underway. Intelligence analysts likely assign probabilities to each scenario. They model decision trees showing potential actions and reactions. They wargame outcomes. Somewhere in a secure facility, people are running computer simulations of exactly how this plays out. They're considering second and third order effects. They're identifying risks and opportunities. They're preparing options for policymakers. The decision about what happens next might not be made yet, but the analysis supporting that decision is definitely underway. The human element matters too. Thousands of American sailors are now stationed off Venezuela's coast. They're away from families during holidays. They're maintaining high readiness on ships that never stop operating. They're professional. They're trained. But they're also wondering what comes next. On the Venezuelan side, military personnel face similar questions. They see the American warships. They understand the capability difference. They're following orders, but also thinking about consequences. Regional nations watch and calculate. Colombia worries about refugee flows if conflict occurs. Brazil concerns itself with border security. Caribbean nations fear disruption to shipping and tourism. Guyana wonders if the deployment relates to their territorial dispute with Venezuela. Cuba considers what American military action in Venezuela means for their own security. Every nation in the region recalculates their positions based on this deployment. If you made it this far, you're the core of our community. Like, subscribe, and hit that bell. The economic ripple effects extend globally. Venezuela exports 600,000 barrels of oil daily. Most goes to China. Disruption would affect global energy markets. Chinese refineries depend on that heavy crude. Alternative suppliers exist, but switching takes time. Energy markets hate uncertainty. Even the possibility of supply disruption creates volatility. Traders price in risk premiums. Consumers eventually pay those costs. The propaganda war matters as much as military positioning. Venezuela broadcasts images of American warships to domestic audiences. Look at the threat we face. See how we resist imperial aggression. The narrative strengthens government control. The United States uses different messaging. We're defending freedom of navigation. We're supporting regional stability. We're deterring aggression. Each side crafts stories for different audiences. Intelligence services worldwide study this deployment. China watches American force projection capabilities. Russia analyzes coordination between ships and shore facilities. Iran observes power projection timelines. North Korea takes notes on American response patterns. Every potential adversary learns from what happens here. The deployment has implications far beyond Venezuela. So, is this coincidence or preparation? The evidence suggests neither. This is strategic positioning. It's creating options while maintaining flexibility. It's demonstrating capability without committing to specific action. It's intelligence collection disguised as routine operations. It's political messaging through military means. It's all of these things simultaneously. Modern military power isn't just about fighting wars. It's about shaping behavior, collecting information, demonstrating resolve, and creating conditions for preferred outcomes without necessarily using force. The 7 warships off Venezuela's coast represent American power in its most sophisticated form. Not crude aggression, not reckless confrontation. Calculated positioning that creates multiple options while forcing adversaries to respond. Whether shots ever get fired matters less than whether objectives get achieved. Sometimes the most effective weapon is the one you never have to use because your adversary understands exactly what would happen if you did. The question isn't whether America can act. The question is whether America will need to act. Those 7 warships ensure the answer remains in American hands. That's not coincidence, that's preparation. But preparation for what exactly? That remains classified.